Welcome again, everyone. My name is Ruma and I will be hosting the session today. We will be hearing about the shift happening in a very complex public organization in Auckland, New Zealand this evening. And this shift is about applying the new ways of working principles across strategy, leadership, governance, and teaming. So it is across the board and not a siloed approach. We are joined by two speakers today from the Auckland Council. Nicky Jones, who is the program manager for strategic programs, and she is also leading the ways of working transformation. Our second speaker, Craig Renshaw, he's the lead advisor strategic programs at Auckland Council, and he's helping shape how the organization aligns investment, strategy, and delivery. Nicky and Craig are working on one of the largest and the most complex portfolios in New Zealand, which makes this session very, very exciting. The sharing is about a public sector organization, but the learnings are equally applicable in the private sector as well. So without any further ado, I will hand it over to Nicky and Craig to share. And if you have any questions while they are sharing, please put them in the Zoom chat and we will have some time to get them answered after the presentation is done. So over to you, Nicky. I'm handing over to you.
Yep, awesome. Thanks, Ruma, and thanks, Jen. So as Ruma said, I'm Nicky Jones, and I'm here with my colleague Craig, and we're just going to take you through a little bit of our story about the change that we've been looking to make at Auckland Council. We're going to do a bit of a tag team effort. Craig was leading the initial the discovery around what the problem was we were trying to solve. So he's going to lead that part of it. And then I came on board and I've been leading the work around the op model and how do we implement that. So we're both still across it. We're both in the same team still, but we've got different roles that we've been playing. So we'll do a bit of a tag team as we go. I'll share the screen and we'll kick off with Craig.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicky, and thanks, Jen and Ruma, for the introduction. So I've been at council about 4.5 years now, which I almost can't believe. It seems like quite a long time. But what I love about it is the fact that we've been pulling on the same thread of change for multiple years, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. And it's just a really exciting organisation with a strong purpose, and the work we're doing is really impactful. In terms of the council background, so Auckland Council's made up of, used to be 5 until the middle of this year, now 4 substantive organisations. So you've got the Auckland Council parent organisation, which is the largest one, and then we've got a transport organisation, a water organisation, and an events and destination organisation. And combined, that Auckland Council group delivers the whole range of type of local government services you might expect. It varies by country, as we know, but community services, community facilities, infrastructure, environmental services, public transport services, water, all of those types of services and activities. There's over 10,000 people working across the group, servicing a population of about 1.8 million. So it's a diverse range of activities delivered by a diverse range of people to a diverse population of Auckland. And that context is important in terms of when we're talking about this work that we're doing around the ways of working. In terms of background to this project, context to this project, it really kicked off a little over 3 years ago now, when, like a lot of organisations around the world, Auckland Council was facing some budget pressures from post-COVID inflationary environment. But there were some questions being asked at the time by leadership. Is it just the financial challenges, or is there a non-financial side to this as well? And that kicked off a piece of work trying to look at the group in a more unconstrained way around what we do and our priorities and focus. And the kind of story that emerged out of that review was that the group had become what it had become from decades of amalgamation and decision-making. We tended to be better at adding things, the assets, the services, the strategies, policies, plans, not so good at taking away. And when we look at the emerging challenges we were facing, like people might be aware, we're having an increasing number of weather events in Auckland, like a lot of places around the world, increasing legislative change, changing community needs from our population. It was how we were operating was no longer sustainable in that context, and we needed to look to something different. And what flowed out of that work, the way that we went to tackle looking at how to approach that, was really going back to first principles in terms of going back to our role as it comes from legislation, in terms of what is local government, how do we come to be what we are at any point in time. And so we went back to the legislation and looked at where the kind of foundation of the role comes from. And there were over 200 pieces of legislation that directed council into what we used to call like a basket of activities. I even learnt a new one today that by legislation, Auckland Transport provides air traffic control services to 2 outer island airports. There's all sorts of things like that we have to do from legislation across a broad range of activities, and we have choice then around the extent to which we do those things, how we do those things, and what else we do, because we do a lot of things that aren't legislated, but they're valued by our communities. Examples might be libraries, for instance. And it's that choice at any point in time that becomes what we are. And working through that first principles review, what we found was this, what's become this inherent or enduring challenge in local government, which is coherence and coordination. So how do we be coherent about what we're trying to achieve at any point in time across that broad range of activities? And how do we be coordinated as an organisation around how we deliver that? And it's really that inherent challenge around coherence and coordination then led into this trail of work that over the last few years that we'll be talking about today. If you flick to the next slide, Nicky. The next stage, once we had that almost enduring problem statement, was we went back to that unconstrained review that I mentioned earlier and looked at, well, how are we operating today? How is that helping or not helping with how coherent and coordinated we are? And there are some of these images on the slide, and I know they were too small to read, but they almost became some quite enduring problem statement images. So one is that if you think about coherent strategic direction, we had very complicated strategic direction just by nature of our strategic landscape. There's hundreds of strategies, policies, and plans. There's local plans. There's strategies for different population groups. There's strategies and policies for different functions, for different assets. And these strategies can often overlap or bump into each other. And it made it difficult for staff to know with real clarity what the direction is around what it is that they were working on, and difficult for our elected members and governors to have confidence that we can demonstrate we were delivering on the different bits of direction that they had directed us to deliver on. Another one was unclear priorities in terms of what I mentioned earlier. A lot of things come into the funnel, but how we incorporate them in with the existing machine and make trade-offs, the process around that wasn't always clear. It tended to just be tackle each thing at a time. And also, similarly to how I mentioned from the basket of activities that we're in, often very different, meant this challenge you have of operating through silos, where if someone's got a water issue and they take it up to the governors, and then someone has a transport issue and they take it up to the governors, and then someone has a pest management issue and you take it up to the governors around decisions. Decision might make sense for any given issue, but when you're trying to run this balanced portfolio, a coherent and coordinated portfolio, there is an opportunity for us to do more around how we consider each decision within the whole. And so these are a few of the examples of some of the problems that we're trying to solve if we want to be as good as we can be in our context of local government and that need for coherence and coordination. So if you go to the next slide, Nicky. So in terms of this ways of working work, we've really agreed 4 outcomes around what success looks like, that all the work that Nicky's going to start taking us through after this slide pins off. One is being very clear on the outcomes that we're working towards for Auckland, and that's, you know, the idea of the outcome-based organisation is very aligned to the sooner, safer, happier approach. Accountability clear across the leadership group, all work visible with resources aligned to agreed outcomes, and trade-off decisions can be based on coherent and coordinated and robust advice. And so that's, I'll kind of pause there in terms of the context setting. Anything you want to add, Nicky, before you then move into the next stages?
No, that's good. So that was kind of the problem that we had, and we had some ideas about what good would look like, but what we needed to do is to really think about what were the initiatives that we needed to put in place that would help us achieve that. And you can imagine in a really complex organisation that Craig described, and we multiple organisations trying to work together for some shared outcomes and some individual outcomes, we needed to think about how were we actually going to structure this work. It couldn't just be one initiative that would sort of fix all of those problems. There was sort of a number of underlying business processes or practices that we needed to think about how do we align those. So this, you don't need the detail, but really what I'm saying here is that, you know, for each of these outcomes, there's a lot of pieces of work that we put in place, but the reason that this is different from previously is that they were all working towards achieving the same goal. So rather than a business planning team saying, well, let's do business planning this way, and the strategy team saying, let's do strategy this way, and somebody else saying, well, I know how to do a restructure and we'll do it this way. It was all around how do we make sure that everything we do, all of our sort of operating model, our practices around the organisation point towards achieving the same 4 goals that we had set. And we know if you've done these before that you'll do something towards outcomes, but actually that should also help accountability, or it should make sure that we're aligning our resources. So all of these things are quite connected. So there's a lot of things in here. I'll talk through a few of them, and we've got a few examples that we can sort of show you. But if there's anything here that you think, oh, I'm interested in learning more about that, just throw it in the chat and we can sort of add that into the list of the things that we talk about. So the first thing that we did is to think about having an underlying sort of framework, or as we've referred to it here, sense-making tool, so that when we did all this work, it was all connected to the same thing. So if being an outcomes-focused organisation, we had our Auckland plan. So that was our long-term 30-year strategy. And that was great, but it was very aspirational and very broad. And so previously, when we just had that, people could say, oh, this is strategically aligned, because basically anything positive for Auckland or Aucklanders, you could kind of align it to the high level goals that we're wanting to achieve. So it wasn't sort of discriminatory enough to say, actually, we should do this or we shouldn't do that. So what we needed to do is to create this sort of sense-making layer. And that's where we brought out this idea of, we call them investment areas. But really what they do is, this is the roles that Auckland Council Group has in contribution to delivering the aspirational outcomes that were identified in the Auckland Plan. So Craig talked through it a wee bit earlier, but the sort of the chunks of work that we do, we have stuff that we do of transport. We have stuff that we do across the 3 waters. We have a clear role to play in terms of our built environment, our natural environment, community, economic and cultural development. And then the well-managed local government is really about how do we make sure we do that in the best way possible, so that we're making good use of public funds and we're delivering all of those things that we've said we'll deliver in an efficient, effective way. And what we wanted to do here is say, we didn't want it to be a structural thing based on our organisational structure. It was around the outcomes we're achieving for Aucklanders. So that's where we use those investment areas, and you'll see those pictures, the colours in particular, sort of show up across a whole lot of different things that we do, because that's kind of what we tie it back to, is what is the investment area outcome that we're trying to deliver, and how are we working across those investment areas. The bits below, which I know will be very hard to read and you don't need to see the detail, but I can talk you through, is just the 23 activities that Council delivers. So these are the things mostly required by legislation. And what we wanted to do is be clear about, well, what is our role in delivering these things? So within the transport area, you'll see the 2 there, the first 2. One is about providing local roads, footpaths and cycleways. The second one is about providing public transport. So it doesn't say the outcome or how we're trying to do that. It just says these are the roles that we have. And this has been a really useful sense-making tool because this is something that we can tie everything back to. So we're clear about what are the activities and then how are they collectively working towards achieving the outcomes within the investment areas that we want to deliver. And it's been quite useful from the sense that in the past, as I said, anything positive could kind of attach itself to the Auckland plan because it was lovely and aspirational. But actually, a lot of those things weren't our role, and they weren't things that we were funded to do, and they weren't things that actually maybe we were best placed to deliver. So having the 23 activities has been really good because we're saying, actually, is this a core business for council to deliver? So that's what we use now as our sense-making tool. And as I say, you'll see this sort of be shown right throughout the different artifacts that we've put together. So that was being clear about the outcomes that we have. As a result, one of the big pieces of work is around getting a group strategic framework. So as Craig said, there were hundreds of strategies, plans and policies, but we called our highest level strategy a plan, Auckland plan. And then we called a whole lot of things strategies that weren't really strategies, and some of them overlapped, and it just wasn't a really clear picture. And so it wasn't clear exactly what it was we were working towards. And how this was shown up for Aucklanders is with all of these strategies, plans and policies, and a lot of them very aspirational but not resourced to deliver, there was over 6,000 statements or promises that we'd made to Aucklanders. And for Ruth and Elizabeth from Auckland, you may know that Aucklanders don't all love Auckland Council. Often the view is that, we're not actually delivering to the things that we've said we'll deliver to. Problem is we're saying we'll deliver to 6,000 things that we're not resourced to do. So the idea here is actually just get really clear, what is our role and what isn't it? And how do we communicate that clearly with our communities? So this is just showing how it fits together. We have aspirations of Auckland from Aucklanders. So they come from communities, from iwi, from partners. But we actually then take those aspirations and have to say, what's Auckland Council's role in delivering this? So what are the things that we can do? Because we can't do everything and we're not well placed to deliver on a lot of the things that are needed. Then we look at, based on the Auckland Council's role, what decisions are we going to make about where we invest our time, our money, our resources to deliver those? And then how are we clear about what are the plans that we're putting in place to deliver on those? So it's a simple hierarchy, a cascade down from the aspirations through to the delivery plans. But previously, it wasn't that clear. So people were just doing nice things that they wanted to do. So this has been kind of groundbreaking for us, even though anyone looking at this would say, well, that seems very logical. So that's been a big piece of work that we've been doing. All right. Moving forward. Another example here of how we have connected these things is through our local elections that are coming up. So Craig, you can talk through this a wee bit more.
Yeah, and like what I'll say to this is that one of the a lot of what we're talking about with these investments areas, they've almost become a scaffolding or a sense-making way that have helped people kind of put the work that they're doing in the context of the broader outcomes. And we've found that just through our kind of rollout of this investment area concept across the organisation, they're starting to be used in more and more areas. So I don't even know the background to where this idea came from, but we just noticed on the elected member profiles for the elections that are happening now, the 7 investment areas were being used for them to frame their positions on the 7 key topics. And so I think just actually having this framework out there that the organisation understands, people are starting to say, we can use this in all sorts of areas, and it's starting to connect governance and strategy setting right down to delivery in a relatively simple framework, but something that the organisation is now starting to become familiar with, including our elected members.
And I think it's a useful one that we used the framing for our last long-term plan for the first time with our elected members. And rather than just saying, what do we want to do, it was easier for us to really say to them, okay, within transport, so what's our priorities within transport, or what are our priorities within water? And start to think about, well, how do we allocate the funding across the long-term plan? Because council is billions and billions of dollars within our 10-year plan. And we need to make sure we're focusing on the right thing. So this has just been great to show that actually the way that we communicate to Aucklanders about our aspirations is starting to filter through to the same language that we use for the way that we allocate work and we measure work within the business. So it's good to have that great governance to delivery connection. Second thing I'll talk about here is this idea of value chains. And I think this is something that Sooner Safer Happier talk about as well. And it's in a few models around this idea that thinking about things end to end. Previously, we thought through the organizational structure. So we thought about things, everybody who worked in the same teams sort of connected up. But what we found is that there was people from various parts of the organization or from the other organization, so part of council group, that were jointly responsible for delivering on shared outcomes. So by thinking about things from a value chain perspective, we're able to say, well, what is everybody's role in delivering towards some common outcomes? So rather than Auckland Transport having their own outcomes and us having ours, it's much clearer now to say within transport, and there's roles from our policy teams, our planning teams, our engineering teams, as well as from Auckland Transport, who have a role in delivering these outcomes. How are we all working together to deliver on those shared outcomes? So that's kind of the model that we've been using around the investment area value chains. And what we've started to do is we have an investment area oversight group for each of the investment areas. So 7 oversight groups. And that's our general managers coming together to collectively say, are we delivering the outcomes that we need to deliver? What is the impact we're having? What are the measures to demonstrate that we're delivering on those things? And if we're not, how do we collectively take responsibility for what we can do? Rather than seeing it through a particular team. So if you're a delivery team, you automatically think of another thing, well, that didn't work, so we need to deliver something else. But perhaps actually a regulatory response might be a better response. Or there might be something more about how do we enable us to scale up throughout our enabling functions. So by collectively getting all the general managers together across the value chain, we've got much better accountability for actually collectively working on those outcomes. This is just a very busy picture, but it shows you how we've been thinking about our delivery planning process. So again, we used to have a system of business planning where it was very much bottom up. Teams had a blank template. They wanted to, they could decide on whatever work they wanted to do. And sometimes they'd share it with other teams, sometimes they wouldn't. And we found that there was duplication happening across the council where people had thought of things that they wanted to do and just kind of gone ahead and done it. What we want to do is get much clearer about how can we, from a top down, say, what is the expectation of this team? What are the things that this team has been set up to deliver? So we've connected that to the value for the investment area outcomes, but we've also connected it to the activities themselves. So to be able to say, what are the activities that you're responsible for and what is your role in delivering it? And the model that we've kind of taken here, I've talked about this on another occasion with SSH, but is around this idea of tight, loose, tight. And that's the model that we think if you're tight up front about what the expectations are, you can allow teams to think better about what is their role in delivering it, but how do we get really tight at the other end to actually measure whether or not they've delivered that? So that's kind of the model we're working on now, and we're getting much better alignment of the work that people are doing. And this responds to that all work is visible, but also we're starting to think about, and how do we make sure we've got those resources aligned to the work that we're doing? So we measure how many FTE are responsible for delivering this. Do we have our people in the right place? What's the funding that's going in to do this? So it's nice to have all of those things connected up. Is there a question there? No?
I might just add a comment on this one,
Sure.
Nicky. Because what was interesting with the department planning was I remember feeling like, because this is a lot more directional, right, in terms of like the extent to which people's department plans are pre-populated with what you need to deliver versus in the previous world, thinking people might, whether there might be resistance to that level of direction, but actually people have really appreciated having things clearly kind of pulled together for them. And they do have, obviously, departments have to add and tweak and review and add other priorities, but actually that whole freedom within a framework, like giving people clearer direction, I think has actually been appreciated by people, wouldn't you say, Nicky?
I think definitely. And Gabby's just asked around the tight, loose, tight. So the model that we were thinking there, and it's one that I've seen work in other organisations, is often organisations will work on this model of, will tell people what to do and they'll just do that thing. But it's really hard to hold somebody accountable if they haven't, actually been able to buy into what they're there to deliver. So many organisations, I think, use like a loose, tight, loose, not really clear about the outcomes. They tell someone this is how to do your job. And as long as you follow that process, you can't really hold them accountable for whether it actually achieved the outcome. Funnily enough, in council, I think it was actually more of a loose previously. We weren't really clear of the outcomes, or we had so many that we weren't clear exactly which ones each team should be working on. Teams had the freedom to do what they wanted to do, which was great. But then we didn't know how to measure the outcomes. We didn't know what the right measures were because we didn't have anything to connect it to. So what we want to do here is we want to provide the support for teams so that we know that they're working on the right thing. But we've gone from so now we're tight about the outcomes and we're tight about the role that they play. So for instance, there's an activity 21, I think it is, it's about engaging Aucklanders. And what we've said is we know the two teams that have a direct role in doing that. There's a marketing and comms aspect to it about how do we actually communicate how people can be engaged in the work that we're doing. And the other one is our governance team about setting the right parameters around engaging with the public. So we've said that to them in their delivery plans. We've said these are the activities that you're responsible for, and this is the task that this is the outcome that you need to achieve. Those teams go away and they know the best way to engage with Aucklanders. So they then have the ability to do that. But we can measure and say, did you actually achieve the outcomes that we asked you to do? So it's actually just been a much more structured way. And it means we can actually get clearer about, are we putting our efforts into the right places and are we actually achieving those outcomes that we said we would? I think I might jump to this last one because I'm conscious of time. And this is kind of about how it all fits together. So we have one of the things, as you know, was about accountability being clear and getting really clear about who was accountable for what. One of the things we did to support that was a tier 2, tier 3. So our senior leadership team we did a restructure, and that was looking at making sure that we had clear accountability in terms of how work was grouped together. But also it was about making sure that we had the accountability sitting at the right level. So we had tier 3, so our CE, you had the executive team who is focused on the strategy, thinking as enterprise leaders and working across the organisation. And the tier 3 leaders, the ones who reported to the exec team, had clear accountability for the functions that they were leading. And what we want to do is make it really clear about how does that show up for them. So we use this analogy of the balcony and the dance floor, and we stole it from Heifetz in terms of his adaptive leadership. But the idea here is that we want to be clear about who was accountable for what at what time. So on the dance floor, you've got the idea of the day-to-day work. This is the work that teams are delivering all the time. And this sort of the purple through to the blue colourful line, that's just showing the different departments that we have in our operating model, sort of the role that they have. But the departments, so the tier 3 level, are responsible for delivering on the dance floor. So their job is to deliver the things they've been asked to do. There you've got the 23 activities that we've talked about, and they show up in the delivery plans, which we've talked about. The department performance is measured mostly on input and output measures, and they're aligned to things that we've committed to Aucklanders through our long-term plan. And we have a way of reporting that monthly. We call it the General Manager Performance View, but it's a way to make them accountable to the exec team that they have delivered the things that they said they would. On the balcony, however, and we've always done that okay, like we've had teams delivering things and it hasn't been bad. But what we didn't have is this balcony view. And the idea of the balcony is every so often, you've got to get off the dance floor to see, is everyone on the dance floor dancing the same speed? Are they doing the right things? Is there something else happening over there that you weren't actually aware of because you were busy just with the people who are around you? So the idea of the balcony is where we lift above and we actually have a chance to see it. And that's when we work at an investment area level and when we use those investment area oversight groups. So we looked at the value chain, all of the GMs and the exec team that are part of that sort of the investment area, get together to collectively say, Not have you done the thing that you said you're going to do well, but are we doing the right things? And that's the I guess the gap in where we'd had previously. We were busy saying if we want to achieve something, we need to deliver 6 of these things. And then for years later, we just measured, did we deliver 6? Yep, we delivered 6. What we didn't do is really go back and say, but has that actually impacted the outcome that we wanted to? So that's sort of the advance that we've made in terms of the new operating model. So on the balcony, you have the investment areas. You have these investment area oversight groups thinking about the value chain. And then that is how we measure our impact on our outcomes. So we're focusing more at that level. It's not did you do it, but actually is it the right thing? And then that is reported through both in public reporting and through to our governing body, who are our governors, in terms of they don't need to know which team did what when. They need to know that if they've asked us to deliver on something for Auckland, how are we tracking at delivering that? So that's kind of how all of these sort of bits fit together.
Thank you, Nicky and Craig. That was a very fascinating share. A lot of work goes behind the scenes to make our lives go easy, smooth, happy. Thank you so much, and have a great evening, everyone.